Welcome, Michael, to the show. I'm really glad to have you on. Of course, I'm personally interested because you are the king of microfame media, and that works with a lot of consultants, right? You make people who are great at what they do, but nobody knows about them. Actually, people can find out about them.
Yeah, that's who we work with for the most part. Mm-hmm.
So why did you choose the name Microfame Media? Is that because the amount of fame they had in the beginning was micro and you're going to make it macro or something? Or, I mean...
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people said to me and still say to me once in a while that that's a bad name because why not tell people they're going to be macro famous, right? Like, why not be famous? Excuse me. Allergies. They're hitting. It's fall. You don't need to be for the kind of people that we work with, for 99.9% of the population. If you're not just trying to be famous for the sake of being famous, if it's a means to an end, which usually is doing what you want to do for a living and getting paid well for it and helping your clients. We're in the internet era, the digital era, and there are all these niches in the digital era, right? So there's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk who, in my world, in sort of the like digital marketing / internet, guru, quote unquote, world is Elvis Presley and John Lennon rolled up into one. But my mom doesn't know who he is, right? So he's micro famous, yeah. But you're sort of in my world, right? So the idea is, how can you take strategies that used to be used to achieve fame on a very large scale, find that group of people who kind of interact, that small world that can seem really big, and blow yourself up in that world, make it seem like you're everywhere at once. So it really is about micro fame.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, because one of the questions I had for you, and I don't even know how to word it, is just the internet is so big and so crowded. And it sounds like what you're saying is, rather than go out with this, shotgun blast type of thing, you got to nail the micro side of it. So what does that look like? I mean, and of course, as I mentioned to you pre-show, we're all about habits right now. Yeah. So, what habits, it's almost like, it sounds like you have a mindset change that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's the internet is massive. To your point, it's probably the closest thing to infinite that human beings have ever created, which is quite a feat, right? I mean, when you were a kid, and when I was a kid, if you told somebody that you could look up anything that you want to know, anything about what, anything, they would believe that you had bases on Mars and cities on Mars before that you could do that, right? So it's crazy. At the same time, so that's true. When people do, I don't even like the word marketing, because what marketing seems like to me is this idea that you're going to go out and do these digital tactics. You're going to Twitter, or you're going to Instagram, or you're going to Clubhouse, and somehow the magical internet fairies will lead clients and customers to your door. And that's not what happens. That's like throwing a cork into the Pacific Ocean, right? The better, I guess, habit to get into. So that's the downside of the internet. The good side is that if you can find that group of 20 to 50 sort of bigwigs in your world, which are often not bigwigs in general, they're the people who go on each other's podcasts, who write on each other's blogs, who talk about each other, you can pretty doably make it seem like you're everywhere at once in that world, in a way that in the era of NBC, ABC, and CBS was very, very hard to do, right? So I think some of the habits to get into are, one, start with mass psychology before you think about the tactics, right? So I think instead of like, it made me laugh. Did you hear about the whole Clubhouse explosion that just died out in 3 seconds, recently?
To be candid, I've heard of Clubhouse. I haven't even gone there. I'm not even fully attuned to it.
Good. Because what happened was Clubhouse came out about 6 months ago, new social media platform. And as always, everybody I knew said, Clubhouse, we're starting a Clubhouse room. You got to get on this Clubhouse. And there's a fear of missing out. And of course, it's already dying down, and it didn't do much for any. It did a lot for like 4 people, and it just went away. Because that's what we do. We jump on these technological trends, this fear of missing out. What I would say the habit to get into is think, how do dig a little bit into, I call it hype instead of marketing. How do human beings behave in groups? How are human beings irrational when they interact? What can you do ethically and to make people's lives better to play with that and add some color to the world by getting people worked up into a frenzy? And then what tools can you pick in your niche or niche, whatever it is? I change it every other time. What tools can you pick to make that happen effectively? So if you get in the habit of looking at math psychology first and then looking at who do you want to reach, and only then think about how you're going to do it, I find that to be a lot more useful.
So I'm following you, but I'm not able to really put some meat on it. Can you give me an example, kind of maybe a before and after of somebody who came and worked with you? So
I have on the top of my mind an example from this book I wrote. I don't mean to evade the question. We'll talk about someone I did, but I was just ready to spew out, an example. So I wrote this book, the Hype Handbook, and it's all about this idea that marketing is a waste of time. Hype is everything. And I just define hype as getting large numbers of people to get emotionally charged up so they'll take an action you want them to take. So for example, there's this guy named Tucker Max, and he got famous about 15 years ago, maybe, or something like that, for writing a book called I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell, which was essentially funny stories about this guy going around and hooking up with lots of girls and getting drunk. A book that would never really fly today. And that's part of the story. But at the time, the book blew up. It might have been 20 years ago. The book blew up and made this guy a very rich man. So time went by, and he got a family. He got married and had a kid, and he no longer wanted to be this guy. But all his fans and following were based on, they called it fratire. So he needed to change what he was doing and continue to make a living, but he didn't want to spend 10 years doing that and building this big following. However, over time, he had built relationships with this knot of people, this knot of very closely connected people, his own little old boys network. So Ryan Holiday is a close personal friend of his. Tim Ferriss is a close personal friend of his. James Altucher, and they're all friends with each other, and they all have podcasts. So he just called up or emailed or whatever, all of these people, and said, listen, I've got this new business I want to do, Book in a Box. It's like a ghostwriting service. Put me on your podcast within like a 3-month period. So he was on all these podcasts. So the thing is, this is a knot. So the people who listen to Ryan Holiday listen to Tim Ferriss, and the people who listen to Tim Ferriss listen to Altucher. So he blew up. He did like $1 million in revenue in the first month. So I think the lesson there is we all try to promote and do this grassroots following. But what you really want to do is make your following seem grassroots, but sort of cultivate a secret society that gets things done for you. So to tie that back to some of the stuff we've done, we had for many years, she went on to do other things, and we're still in very good touch, but a client named Gabriella Mirabelli, and she had a company that, did branding for large networks. So a big company, and not a big company, but a successful company. They did editing and branding for like all the big cable channels. But she wanted to kind of be strategic about her next move, because she ultimately sold the company. She knew she was going to sell it, and she wanted to tee herself up, but was known as this one thing. So what we did was we created a podcast for her called Up Next, and we positioned her as the person who knew about all the up and coming media trends. Now, she did know about all the up and coming media trends, but no one knew that she knew about all the up and coming media trends. So we built a list of people, one of whom was Danielle Feinberg, who is the director of photography at Pixar. So the person who basically more or less invented lighting for computer animation, the very important, person in modern entertainment. has a TED Talk, not a TEDx, TED. And we emailed her. Now, granted, the podcast didn't exist yet. We emailed her and we said, hi, Danielle, we're big admirers. We're putting together a podcast that focuses on the top 50 unsung digital, media heroes of the digital world. You're on our short list. You've heard this technique before. And she said, wow, it is so nice to be noted in front of the scenes instead of behind the scenes. And they started this relationship. It blew up the podcast and made her a very successful person in this new field. Now, the thing to note is we really felt Danielle Feinberg was one of the top 50 new media people.
Yeah.
But by appealing to what she needed, appreciation, exposure, we were able to start creating this knot of people around Gabriella that really took her to the next phase of her career.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So, and if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like this secret society thing, a lot of times a portion of them are already in your network, your contacts, right?
Well, yeah, that's a great question because I skipped this step. So Tucker Max, to use my previous example, was a very clever guy. So he knew he would eventually want to make a next move. He didn't know what it would be. So he spent many years nurturing these connections. So you always have to be nurturing this secret society before you get there. So in other words, the time to ask for a favor from someone isn't two minutes after you meet them. It's maybe a year after you meet them. And after you've done a lot of great things for them, after you've hooked them up, after you've done favors for them. And they should be people you want to know, not just that you want to use and get things from.
Yeah.
But there's not a person in the world who's successful, who's not in the middle of a scene or well-connected. So you always want to be thinking, okay, what can I give people that's cheap for me to give up, financially or otherwise? What's something that's very doable, that doesn't take much time or resources for me to give up, but that's extremely valuable to them? Yeah.
So very strategic in what you're doing, and also the patience thing. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, patience is key.
Yeah.
We don't always want to hear that, right? I mean, we want to, that's what's so seductive about all this Twitter, Clubhouse, Instagram stuff, that you can push a few computer buttons and get all these leads. But that doesn't really happen almost ever.
Yeah, it seems to go back to the old school stuff. I mean, I knew there was a guy I wanted to get to know many years ago, decades ago. And I tried to connect, a few times. It wasn't working. He was really busy in his schedule. And it took me a couple decades, literally, Michael, where then I realized, if I had gone helped him in his nonprofit, and I had served him in his nonprofit, which I was sincerely interested in.
You can't fake it. Exactly.
Yeah, you can't fake it. Yeah, I would have been sincerely interested in that. I was sincerely interested in him. So I wasn't just smoozing, making it up. We could have really had a good relationship. But I had to be the person to step in and serve because he was too busy and I was on the fringe.
100%. That's it.
Yeah.
I also think there's another layer to this, and this is very long-term, but it's really, key. Just like you have a diverse stock portfolio, right? Yeah. You want diverse people in this, as I call it, secret society. So of course there are people that are already prominent that you want to connect with, but you want to keep an eye out for those people who just interest you, who show promise. So I'll give you an example from my own career. So I went on my own about 11 years ago. That's when I started my business. And and for about 2 years, I was a freelance copywriter. And then after that, I started Microfame Media. It evolved into that.
Yeah.
So my second client at Microfame Media was this really small company that had no employees and had an intern, young kid at the time, young guy who was a senior in college named Chris Weller. So this was 11 years ago. And I met him and he was an intern, doing some work to get experience. He wanted to be a journalist and he was writing content for this business. So something about him just like interested me. He had nothing to give me, but he was sharp, and he was really responsive, and he was a really good writer, and he was ambitious but kind, and always had interesting stuff to say. So over the years, I just made sure to do what I could for him because he was starting out and to keep in touch. But I liked this company. So I would hold these dinners. I live near New York City. And before the pandemic, I was there 3 days a week. And I would hold these dinners where I would have interesting people at the dinners and a lot of prominent people. But I would always invite him. So then he was 22, then he was 23, then he got a job, a very low level position. I forget his first job. He just climbed the ladder. So my book, which has been this lifelong dream of mine to get this book idea published as a book, the Hype Handbook, was published by McGraw Hill, and I needed now to promote it. This guy, Chris, was just made senior editor of Business Insider a decade later. He's a very important person now at one of the top business publications in the country. Yeah. So I said, hey, Chris, I got this. I've been hearing you talk about that for years. He did a full excerpt, in Business Insider, which for those of you who know is a massive deal for a business book, right? Oh, yeah. And was game changing. So I didn't think to myself, in 10 years, this guy is going to give me an excerpt, in Business Insider. But he had something. I knew that by knowing this guy, you just want to, I think you want to look forward to, you want to invest your time in people who have potential or who interest you or who are doing cool stuff, even if it's not fully realized yet. Yeah. And I think it comes back to the old thing, relationships. And so you just connected, you want to keep the relationship going. And I can give you one thing that doesn't fully follow what you're recommending as a habit, but my son lives in SoCal. He works with me in the business. He actually helps produce these episodes. And he met a guy who was pretty successful yoga guy, instructor down there in SoCal. And so we had him on for an interview on the podcast, just because he's a buddy and he's an expert at what he does. And we talked through these things. Well, it's kind of interesting. And I didn't stay in touch with him because I don't have the connection. It's really my son's connection. He's 35. But, that was one of the most popular podcasts that we've done. We've done almost 200 podcasts. Right. And I think his podcast was in the top 5. I think that does follow. You got to open yourself. So many people, what we're really talking about is this thing that people call networking, but I really avoid that word because people talk about networking like it's this. If I do, that's why I think BNI, that group, which has done a lot of good in the world, actually has a problem, in it. It's that you exchange leads. Like you're required to come and do like 4 introductions every X period of time, or they basically like put you on probation. And I think the problem with that is if you're going into this thing that we call networking, which I call building a secret society, as like, I'm going to like do 4 introductions per X period of time because the law of reciprocity will kick in and I'll get 1 lead per every 4 introductions within a month. That's kind of like, I don't mean to be crass, but that's like if you go on dates and you say to a young lady, I bought you dinner, why aren't we going to bed together? You know what I mean? It's kind of that vibe, right? It doesn't feel right and it doesn't work. Well, it's very shallow. Exactly. So it's very interesting. You're kind of going old school. Today we're saying, oh, wait a minute, I got my phone here. So I'm supposed to be able to do something here. There's supposed to be a lead. There's supposed to be whatever. Everything's supposed to happen so fast. And you're saying, whoa, slow down. So find what you're interested in and plant the seed, water the seed, nurture the seed, and have fun doing it because you're sincerely interested in the individual and what they're doing. But don't do it because there might be something down the road, like you talked about your young guy for 10 years or whatever. And you weren't doing that relationship expecting him to be Business Insider senior editor. No, it wasn't totally altruistic in that I know that if I am doing this kind of activity all the time, I hate to use the dating example because it sounds really scummy, but if you're a single guy, they always say, or a woman really, put yourself in situations where you can meet lots of people that could be dates. Now, you don't say to yourself, I want that one person. If that doesn't become my wife, I'm going to, be miserable. It's that, you need to be exposing yourself to these situations. I think what it comes down to, I'm not the first person to say this by a long shot, but the human brain has evolved much, 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 much more slowly than the technology that we create, right?
Yeah.
And we're the most social beings on earth. And we are evolved not to see the world accurately, but to survive and pass on our genes. And so all of that in combination means that if you're going to have an effect on people, which you need to have if you're going to get them to invest in your business, right? Invest meaning pay you or become involved in it or give you exposure. You need to first look at human beings as the primates that we are, so all of this stuff we're talking about, which is just one of 12, overall principles that I call hype, is the function of tribalism. It's the function that we were dependent on many years of a very tight-knit community of people. And that's not about Twitter or Instagram or Clubhouse or blogging. That's about ancient stuff.
Yeah. Well, and the ancient stuff goes back to the relationships. It reminds me, and I'm sure neither of us want to go political in the podcast, but it reminds me, if you think back to Reagan, President Reagan,
oh, yeah,
he got along with everybody. They didn't always agree, but he was doing the strategic partnership thing. He was always looking for areas of commonality, get along, whatever. Whereas now everybody just fights with everybody.
So it's funny that you bring the Reagan thing up because I'm not going to betray my political beliefs in this. I'm going to talk about
it's fine.
The fact that he won and Tip O'Neill won. So apparently, Tip O'Neill was the head of, I guess, the Speaker of the House at the time.
Yeah.
And he was a
Speaker
Democrat.
of the House. Yeah.
And Reagan obviously was president. And so Reagan, in addition to him being good at the connection building, what he was really good at was packaging. So even though his policies were very, very pro big business, he made it seem like he cared about the little man, and because he was so folksy, and he knew how to do that because he was a movie star, he knew how to package himself. Yeah. Whereas Tip O'Neill, his great strength was what you just said. He would know how to massage both sides of the aisle, and he had friends in the Republican side and friends in the Democrat and donors and this and that. Right. So, and they both overlapped. So that was an era where it really was about getting power through relationships and power through presentation versus what you're describing in our modern day.
So what strikes me, and I have no time in my calendar, but it still strikes me that what you're teaching, if I'm understanding you correctly, Michael, is that if I were to take some time this week and write down 5 or 10 or 20, whatever people that I really think I like them, or I could like them if I got to know them, and they don't have any time either. But if I started on this strategic quest of trying to develop relationships by going and serving them in some way, connecting them, like you mentioned, the Pixar gal, she never got any notoriety, but she really deserved it. And you just did her a favor. And, it seems like the approach you're taking, which is sincere, but also has an upside, you can't lose, can you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, unless you're in a rush, like if you need 6 deals tomorrow or you're going to go bankrupt, and which people, we get ourselves in those situations as entrepreneurs sometimes.
Yeah.
But remember, the other thing I want to bring up is that this is, one of 12 hype principles. So again, I spent, a lot of my life's work is that I said to myself, look, there are a lot of like bad guys, people with bad intentions who are really good at manipulating people. They're really good at getting large groups of people to do what they want to do. And the reason they're good at it isn't so much that these psychological strategies are inherently bad. They're neither bad nor good. They're just the way we are. It's that people who are, sociopaths, narcissists, whatever, they see the world as it really is, and they don't let emotions get in the way. Whereas a lot of the rest of us, to lesser and greater degrees, are like, that's not how it should be. It doesn't seem right. So my whole thing is, because my whole mission in life is to get really good ideas an audience instead of cruddy ideas, I read like hundreds of books and academic papers about the most effective mass movers of people in society. And they're usually not professional marketers. Donald Trump is one, Reagan is probably one, but, Martin Luther King, but also the Blair Witch Project or certain rock band managers or cult leaders. And I said, what strategies could we pull out that can be applied ethically to make the world a better place? And are there repeating trends? Because if there aren't repeating themes, then you can't really do much with it. Yeah, and it turns out there are like 12 things you see, 12 principles or strategies over and over and over. And this secret society thing that I love this one, and I've used it in my career a lot, and I love talking about it, but it really is only one of 12. There's one that's make war, not love. It's picking an external enemy to build a tribe around yourself. So the one is like the nice, fluffy side, build relationships. But the other is just as true. I mean, you'll see all the time, if you draw a line in the sand and make an us versus them sort of dynamic, that works wonders.
There's plenty of those opportunities today.
Yeah, but so you're talking about how it's done poorly. And we've seen a lot of people in politics gain a lot of power, but kind of hurt their country by doing that.
Yes.
But at the same time, what if your enemy is inequality? So Martin Luther King, he would often say, I am angry that the country I love is not living up to its potential. You know what I mean? Like if that becomes your enemy. So an enemy doesn't have to be a person. It doesn't have to be hateful. It's just that people are much better at defining themselves against something than they are by defining themselves for something. And that's been studied, by neurologists and neuroscientists and things like that.
It's interesting. So it sounds like, we're approaching year end here. It sounds like your book is a great investment for leaders going into year end and starting to think about 2022 and beyond. Or for leaders, quite frankly, I would suggest to consider as a gift to some of your proteges, your staff or whatever, to meet with as a team to say, okay, what can we take from these hype concepts that would apply for us that we want to try to implement in 2022? Because it sounds like these are some behavioral changes that people would be making that could be quite significant.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to think so. Thank you. Those are kind words. And that was really my goal. Naturally having written a book as a business person is helpful in a lot of ways. But when I hear people say, I wrote this book as a business card, and they say it proudly, I get what they're saying, but it bothers me a little bit because there are so many ideas. Reading a book's an investment of time. It takes time. And to me, I feel like the bad guys have had access to this stuff for so long. It's time for the good guys to have a shot. Like how many times we both work with consultants. You are and were a consultant. I've worked with, and I'm a kind of a consultant as well and work with consultants. And how many times have you seen a consultant and all they're selling is ideas, and their ideas are so much better than the people that are getting all the attention? But they can't package them. They can't hype them up the right way. And that kills me. That just kills me. I had to fix that, do my part to, correcting that balance.
Yeah, there's some people out there that are very sharp. And it's fun when you meet them and you talk with them and get to know them better and what they're doing and who they're working with. And some of them do well. We have a guy in our industry. I do a lot in the computer industry. I work outside the industry also, but there's a guy, Rex Frank. He started a company called C-Level Ops, and he was just great on operations. Yeah. And he worked out a method where he could drive the business forward, and he drove it forward very successfully. And I don't know, maybe 3 months ago, sold the business. He had grown it to like a dozen consultants.
He was micro famous. He obviously figured out in his crazy his really small niche how to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, no, it was that way. And I recommended him for like 12 years, and he recommended me, and we never did it with any, payments or reference fees, whatever. We just did it because we knew each other. We believed in each other.
And he was right. So he could follow through with it. But I'm sure, but like you said, It's funny. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed that $1 million in revenue is about the best you can do without hyping yourself up. So you can do $1 million on referrals. You know what I mean?
Agree.
You got to be really good. You got to be really, really, really good. But if you're really good, the best you can do, I would say the absolute ceiling is $1 million in revenue. And I constantly talk to these people where they show me their ideas and they're so different and so good. And they're like, I've been trying to crack past $1 million, and we have a lot of overhead. So they basically, they don't say it, but they're putting 100,000 or less in their pocket, you know?
Yeah.
And you know that what's making the difference is they aren't as good as the Simon Sinek's of the world or the, Tony Robbins of the world or whatever at actually getting people excited on a mass scale about those ideas.
Yeah. So talk to me, Michael, about what you're doing. You've got the book. That's great. So talk a little bit about the book and then talk about if there's other things that you're doing to help people, because I really like what you're saying. I love the sincerity. I love the strategic side of it. It's really great.
Thanks. That means a lot. And I've dug into you quite a bit, and it means a lot coming from you particularly. I'm not.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my audience knows I would not be behaving this way unless I was sincerely interested. I am. Well,
yeah. I mean, I'll talk about the book, and I'll talk about a little bit of my background and what we do. I mean, again, I've said it 5 times, but the title, but I didn't say the subtitle. So it's the Hype Handbook, but the subtitle is long but fun. It's 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. So that says it all.
I like it. Yeah.
Kind of like the Borat, title. So that's the book. In terms of what we do, it's interesting. I never wanted to be a business person. I wanted to be an artsy kind of guy. I wrote fiction, and then I played in bands and punk bands when I was young. And I don't know how good we were, but we were really good at packing a room. And we used to call it hyping things up. We never called it marketing. I didn't even know what that was. But I would do things like, the one thing people love to hear about, I would dress like a nun and walk around the Lower East Side and then get people to come into the club, things like that, But when that sort of broke up, as most bands do, I went into the corporate world. So I had like 10 years or so in the corporate world. And when I couldn't take it anymore, I became a freelance content writer. And I figured, because I've always been, a good writer, that people would just pay me to write for them. And they didn't. And I almost lost all my savings until I figured out that my problem was I had become corporatized. I was trying to market myself. I was using A/B testing and search engine optimization and doing all this, and it wasn't working. So long story that I do describe in the book, but I eventually decided I'm going to hype things up again instead of marketing things. So I picked some fights with some prominent, Gary Vaynerchuk was the person who picked the fight. He responded directly. I don't know. And my career blew up. I became a successful copywriter. And then I started an agency. And our agency, Microfame Media, for many years, I think we did a lot of good work. But what we would do exclusively is we would come in with these high-minded ideas about hype. But then when people started working with us, it was kind of, they say jump, we say how high. So it went from, hey, let's do these big strategic plans, to by month 6, hey, we have 4 taglines for you to write. We need it done by Monday. So it was like, right. But what I noticed was, even though that wasn't that effective, it's a pain in the neck to have to work that way. What the problem was, it wasn't helping our clients as much as it could, because with this concept of hype, these deep psychological sort of things, we would want to weave these things through their DNA. And I've noticed this is an element of human nature. When somebody hands over ownership to someone else, you do the marketing for me, they don't own it. I don't know if you've seen this, but the more they give up control of, so that, and again, my clients have been great with some notable exceptions, but, hey, we really want to punch the industry in the face, go market for us. And then they show up to a podcast interview and talk with all the corporate jargon in the world. You know what I mean? So what we started to do is we created a different model where, instead of just doing the stuff for them, we have a program that's based around the hype principles where we design experiments with them. So every segment of time, we start with a hype principle. We make sure it's in their bones. Then we work together using tools that we customize for them to create a series of experiments based on that hype principle. We stand by their side the whole time, but the client actually goes out and does the smallest possible step to see if there's traction behind that experiment. And then once we catch one that works on that spinning plate, we then scale the experiment, and we layer the different hype principles. So the idea is by the end, yeah, it's a marketing thing, but by the end, the hype strategy is baked into every fiber of their being, and they're generating whatever result they want in the way they talk about their projects, in the way they show up to interviews, in the way they dress. And that's really, our clients have gone above and beyond even what we did, in the old model, and we're loving every day of it. So
awesome. I love it. So how do they learn more about you? And the book is the Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers. I like the mischief makers, and boundary breakers. I like that too. So, and so we can get the book anywhere, realize that. But if they want to get a hold of you, like this test thing sounds like interesting to them, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the book obviously is on Amazon. I'm going to, the company is microfamemedia.com, FAME. So you can go there, and I'll just give out my personal email address. It's a little bit, it's long, but, feel free, even if you just have a question. It's MFS, like Michael, Frank, Sam, at microfamemedia.com.
Cool. Well, that's great, Michael. I want to thank you so much for being on. This has been very interesting. I'm checking out the book. And I'm going to talk with my son about, thinking about what we should do in 2022, because we got some big stuff's happening, but we need to bust it open, just like a lot of other people out there.
Well, listen, this was a fun interview. Thank you. I really enjoyed this.